All right, test, check 1, 2. This thing working? Sweet, let's get this thing rolling. Boom, there I am. Hello and welcome to another Monday afternoon Ableton office hours stream. My name is Zaak Kerstetter and I'm an Ableton Certified Trainer. And this is what we do here on Mondays, is we hang out and usually I will be screwing around, making some noises or some sounds, and you guys are more than welcome to hop on in and ask me questions about anything you may have questions about as it relates to music production or Ableton Live or whatever. You can just ask me anything, really. So yeah, so I hope everybody had a good holiday. I took last Wednesday off from the song feedback stream so I could travel see some family, but it was nice and it was relaxing. Didn't really do a lot of music the last week, but now that I'm back, I have less than a week before the start of my 1 song per week challenge. So for those of you guys who are not aware, I'm going to be writing 1 song per week for the entirety of 2022, just as a challenge, just to kind of like keep myself sharp, just to focus on having deadlines and trying to hit really tight deadlines consistently, which I think is a fantastic way just to grow as a producer, is just make lots and lots of stuff. So that's going to be starting essentially in a week. I guess I will actually start a week from today is kind of when the first song will be started, because I'm doing a Monday to Sunday kind of thing. But you are more than welcome to join me in that challenge if you are interested in just challenging yourself to write a bunch of music. You can kind of join me and follow along. I'm going to be making videos about it for the channel, about what works, what didn't work, where I got stuck writing tracks, all that kind of stuff, and just kind of see what happens after a year and see where it goes. And if you are interested in learning more about that, you can check out the Patreon. That's where I'm going to be doing a lot of the Song of the Week challenge stuff. Is going to be through Patreon. But other than that, I'm still going to be making videos, still releasing videos, still streaming for obviously the entirety of this year as well. So sometimes when I'm starting these streams, I have a pretty clear idea of what I'm going to do. Today I did not. I was super busy this morning. So if anybody's just joining us and you would like to just ask us a question, feel free to toss it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to start making some sounds. I'm feeling like maybe writing a beat and just kind of seeing where that takes us. But yeah, that's what we're going to do for right now. So we're going to start off, we'll start a brand new drum rack from scratch, because I need to make some more drum racks. And let's use some samples I don't normally use. Let's go to my sample library. Let's try to find some kicks and just quickly put together a rack here. Grab one of these guys. I don't particularly want to do an 808 thing necessarily. Kind of like that one. All right, we're gonna take that one and let's layer this bad boy up with something that has like a nice punch to it. That could maybe work. I want something that has like a nice impact to layer with kind of the distortion of this guy. That could work. Let's take these 2 bad boys. I don't mind that at all. What we're going to do here is on this one, though, we're going to give this a little bit of a fade in. So that way we have like a couple milliseconds where this one really gets to shine. Do a little bit more than that. And I want this one to fade out a little faster. I don't need to be quite as long, so we'll do a little manual fade out here. Cool. That's going to be our kick. And we'll probably add some more effects to it in just a moment. And then let's find a snare. Now let's also just go to the native instrument stuff. Those are all side sticks. I don't mind an 808 for the snare here. Let's layer it with something a little different. That could maybe work. A little too similar to what I have though. I kind of like that. Might need one more layer on these guys. I kind of like the weird little bit of noise on that one. Let's make it not quite so long, and let's make this one a little quieter. All right, and then we're going to affect those guys once we grab a hi-hat. Hi-hat, I'm just going to be lazy about and go to my instruments, grab drum synth, and I've been really liking the drum synth hi-hat. It's so quick and easy. Cool, there's my hi-hat. So I've been using this guy a lot just because it's like you drag it in, you change two things, and you get the hi-hat you want, as opposed to going through like a million hi-hat samples and they all kind of sound the same. So that's gonna be our hi-hat. Let's beef up our snare a little bit with some reverb and a compressor. I like to turn the decay down a little bit, dry wet down a little bit. Give the compressor a little bit of attack. Sounds a bit better. Soft clip it. And then let's put a little saturator on our kick. Let's get very loud very fast. Turn this down a little bit. Okay, it's super velocity sensitive. All right, that'll work there. I guess I'll just try playing something and capturing it. But of course, if anybody is just joining us and has any questions or things that they want to talk about, you're more than welcome to toss those questions in the chat, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Getting close to it. Let's try that. These are so velocity sensitive. I might have to get these a little bit more consistent in velocity. Let's get that guy on time. That guy a little more on time. All right, that's gonna be the start of my beat. And then from here, we're going to toss in a bunch of hi-hats, and let's try to do something interesting with the hi-hats and maybe like toss in some triplets every once in a while. So let's start with just an 8th note hi-hat pattern. And then let's do some triplets. I don't mind that, actually. And then let's do some fast ones down at the end. All right, let's duplicate this thing and let's set this up so that we no triplet grid anymore. Might do some 16th notes. Cool. Let's see what happens when I do this. I feel like the kick is a little bit too distorted for me now that I'm like hearing it in context a little bit. So what I might do is just tone down the volume of the distorted one a little bit. Turn this guy down a little bit. It's getting there, I feel like. Let's go back to our triplets and do something like that. Cool. That's kind of what I was thinking, more or less a little bit. So maybe from here, we will make some more variations on this. Also, if anybody here is a regular viewer and in the past have noticed situations where my microphone cuts out, it was because of this, like CPU issues. It was for some reason just killing my microphone. I think I fixed it. So it's one of the things I'm curious to experiment on is to see if a microphone is still behaving the way it should be. As of now, it should be, but I think we should be good to go from here on out. I think I figured out what was causing the mic issues. Sweet, so from here, let's add some more kicks. Oh, we're in the triplet grid. I don't want triplet kicks necessarily. I don't know. I'm like not sure how I feel about the hi-hat pattern. It feels a little crazy to me. But we'll keep it the way it is right now. I wonder if we get like a cleaner 808 might work better here instead of that distorted one. Not sure if I'm feeling that. Not sure I'm feeling that either. I think I might just stick with the distorted one. All right. Sweet. So now that I've got that, I think I want to see what happens if I take it a little further down the rabbit hole of distortion. I talked about this a little bit on the channel 2 weeks ago or something like that, but we're going to put some Runa on this, which is an absolutely ridiculous distortion device. And it's going to demolish it, and we're going to get some really distorted beats, because that's what I'm feeling like today. Which is kind of cool. So I personally love that. However, the dry wet on Runa is not very subtle. It's like pretty much like, even if you have a tiny amount of dry wet, you just get a lot of sound coming out of this thing. So what I'm going to try doing today is we're going to put it on a return track, and that way I can still get my actual beat and be able to kind of control the amount of distortion I'm getting and still get the same amount of actual beat. So we're gonna see how this sounds. Yeah, I think the Runa is definitely doing it for me. And this might be one of the few situations where I recommend putting a distortion on the return track. What's up, Silvano? How are you doing? Yeah, Runa is 100% a fantastic plugin. I'm definitely feeling this a lot more than I was before. I just want to figure out what kind of settings I want to really like get the most out of this thing. Perfect. I love it. There's my beat right there. So as of right now, I'm going to keep playing around with this a little bit, but if anybody is just joining us and has any questions, Anything they like to talk about, feel free to toss those questions in the chat, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. All right, so from here, we're gonna make a beat that sounds like this. Where does one go from here? How does one like take this and, you know, turn this concept into a song? I feel like I don't really need to add a bass because basically the distortion from the low end on my kick is already kind of like acting like the bass. So I feel like I need to have like a weird synth part, like a really weird abstract synthy thing to go on top of this. But if you guys in chat have any ideas of directions you want me to take this, feel free to let me know. I'm gonna keep scrolling at the beat a little bit more, but then I think we're gonna move on to, I don't know, some kind of weird pitch bendy, detuned synthy thing could be kind of cool. Yeah, Hugo, Runa is free. I made a video about it on the channel a couple weeks ago, but if you go to noiseengineering it's not com, I think it's dot, I forget what it is, just Google noise engineering, and check out their website, make an account, log in, all their plugins are free. Or the 3 plugins they've released so far that you can use in live are free. And it looks like they have some more that they are working on as well that I'm very excited about. All right, I feel like the hi-hats can be a little cooler. I feel like we need a little bit of variety here. And again, I'm going to be lazy about this, and I'm going to just duplicate my drum synth. And on the second one, I'm going to make it sound a bit different. Should be this guy. Maybe I'll be... Yeah, it's .us. Yeah, I knew it was .something that wasn't CO because in the video I made a mistake. I'm not sure if that's different enough, but we'll try it out. So we're going to take some of these hi-hats and we're going to switch them to be the other hi-hat. And if we don't like it, we will just swap them out. It's kind of cool, but it needs to be more obvious. Yeah, we're gonna have to find a sample that is more interesting than that. That'd be good. Let's also grab a shaker and toss it in there. Let's see if we can find like a... I feel like it's always really good when you are doing hats and things like that to have a couple different sounds in there. Now we can like rotate between them. Something like that we can toss in here too. Now we can switch up between these different sounds. All right, we just have to just do like 8th note shakers or something. See how this does it for us. thanks, Okwa. I think that's pronounced Okwa. I don't know if that's supposed to be pronounced at all. I really appreciate it. All right, so we got some shakers going on here. Make them a little higher velocity. All right, and then let's get the distortion back in here. Cool. There's a lot going on the high end, and the distortion really emphasized a lot of it. So we're probably going to have to tone that back down at some point, just because there's going to be too many high frequencies. But I'm also just really curious if I just grab like a sample shaker loop kind of thing and toss this in here, what that'll sound like going to the distortion. So let's see if we can find like a shaker. Like something like that could be cool. These are not really shakers. All right, let's take either one of these two and then send it through the distortion and kind of control the amount of distortion as we listen to it. So it might be too much. Yeah, neither of those are quite doing what I want it to do. Let's see if we can find a different percussion loop. Try that. That's too slow. That might be, yeah, too fast. These are all either too fast or too slow. There we go. Let's try this one. Yeah, see, it's not picking up the rhythm. It's just adding noise there. So we might need to have a separate distortion just for our percussion if we want to have distorted percussion. This one almost works. Rhythmically, I feel like it's adding this little bit of like off time thing to it, which I think is fantastic. I'm not sure the sound quite fits the vibe of the other drum beat, but maybe that's what we're going for. I bet if I put a bunch of effects on this thing, we can make that work. That one's not working. Let's take that, and in this case, instead of using Runa, we're going to use maybe some like pedal. Something makes it louder. Maybe a little bit of overdrive. Maybe push up a little bit. Maybe that works. It's just like a little bit too far off. It actually looks like it's not, maybe not warped correctly. I don't know. The timing on this one is like super loose. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. This one is the easy one though. Although it doesn't need the distortion. Although let's make it a little more choppy and see what happens. This is a really cool technique if you're using the Beats warp mode. if you put it into non-loop mode and set the transients to be a timing, say like 16th notes, you can basically fade out every 16th note. And so basically it'll chop it up. Because right now it's got that really, like the noise from each one of these sounds bleeds into the next one. So if I turn this down, it makes it a little more choppy. So I kind of like that a little better than that, because that gives us a lot of background noise, and we already have a lot of noise with our distortion. So this will make it a little more choppy. Cool. That gives us a little more percussion to work with. And I might play around with the other one a little bit more and see if we can bring in there. But I think some really loose sounding percussion on this will go really well to give it a little bit of swing, to make it move a little bit. But we'll figure that as we go. So it looks like we have a few more people joining us now. If anybody has any questions, feel free to toss those questions in the chat. That's really what this stream, the Monday afternoon streams, are really kind of all about. So if you have things you want to talk about, things you want me to cover, or you just want to, talk about a plugin or whatever, feel free to toss it in the chat, and we will definitely dive into it. Right now, I'm just kind of screwing around making this beat, but yeah, I'm here for you guys. So whatever you want to talk about, that's what we'll get into. All right. So this is the easy part, making a super weird distorted beat that I'm feeling pretty good about. The trick is, once you get that cool distorted beat, how do you layer something on top of it that works? So I'm feeling like a wavetable is going to be our answer. And I'm feeling like, as I mentioned earlier, something like weird and pitch bendy, like a pitch moving, could be really cool. Something really fast, something really choppy, and that we can make something cool, like rhythmic with it. A synth line kind of like that, I think is going to be my answer. But I'm not tied to that. If we, along the way, come up with something kind of cool, I will not be upset about that. All right, so we can start with the square wave, and let's make it a little more kind of plucky, give it a little bit of unison. And then here's the thing. If we can get the pitch envelope to work, I'll be stoked, because pitch envelopes can be kind of a pain. So we're going to take envelope 2, we're going to apply that to our pitch. We'll have it start maybe an octave higher, or 2 octaves if we want to try that out. And that gives us that, not only that nice kind of like percussive pluck kind of sound, but also gives us kind of like a laser sound, depending on what we want to play. So something like that could be a cool place to get started. Let's crank the unison. Normally I don't recommend taking the unison above 50%, but with this sound, we're trying to make it sound really kind of like off-putting and a little dissonant, and I raise the pitch envelope in there. So we can play at that envelope, we can play at this envelope. Try the pitch envelope a little bit. Something like that could work. Let's make this a little better. Let's also apply our envelope 2 to our filter frequency. It's not quite working for me, but let's go hella higher. That's kind of what I was imagining. It's 'cause, 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 ' What's up, Chapati? How you doing today? So yeah, that's kind of along the lines of what I was imagining happening here. Yeah, drums can be really tricky, Hugo. It really like so much of the vibe of your song and even like the genre of your song is determined by simply how your drums sound and like what kinds of drum uh, techniques and samples you're using to process those drums. Um, but yeah, a little bit of distortion with drums, especially if you're making a more kind of like darker, more aggressive style of music, can make a big difference. Like here, I'm going really over the top to do more of like a death grips kind of like arca kind of distorted drum beat kind of thing. But just like a little tiny hair of distortion on your drums can make a huge difference. So that's kind of what I was imagining when I put this together. It's cool. I'm not quite sure what octave I want this to be in yet. I'm gonna play around with it a little bit, kind of see where it goes. Let's go back to try one octave and see how it sounds. What if we go 3 octaves? There's so many fun sounds you can do with pitch envelopes. Let's get a little closer, I think. Oh, I kind of like that actually. That's kind of cool. I'm not opposed to that. I don't know what pattern I want to do yet. Maybe tone down the distortion a little bit. Let's take that and see what we can do with it. Too much going on. It was starting here. What's up, Ringa? How you doing today? I'm glad you are enjoying the videos. All right, this may be too high-pitched. They don't really go together, unfortunately. All right, each individually is kind of cool, but not at the same time. We could also, if I want to, get creative with the drum beat and see if this works a little bit better. Just 16 notes, just to see what happens. No, too many kicks. I meant to have half as many kicks. There we go. So Ringa's asking, are there any techniques we can use to help sounds sound better together? Is glue compression probably the main technique? Well, there's a lot of different techniques, really, when it comes to making things. I'm assuming you're making things like having multiple sounds and making them sound cohesive. Glue compression definitely helps. I think in a lot of cases, using either your return tracks or using group-based processing is a really fantastic way, especially if you have, like, I don't know, 4 different guitar layers, and they're each like different guitar parts, but you want them to sound like it's all one kind of sound. Just taking things and putting them in groups is a fantastic way to do that. I'm sure you're already doing that. But especially with like things like reverbs and delays, those two effects specifically, because they're both kind of like space or time-based, it helps it make it sound like your sounds live in the same space, right? So they have the same delay on multiple different sounds, makes them sound like they all live in the same world together or the same room together. Same thing with reverbs. Reverbs are fantastic for taking sounds that are maybe a little bit different and kind of like putting them all together. And in terms of how you implement those, either groups, using return tracks are probably the 2 best ways to do it. I'm trying to think if there's like any other effects that I use a lot for cohesiveness. I mean, distortion can definitely help, as I'm trying to do right now. But reverbs, delays, in addition to compressors, would probably be the things that I would look into the most for trying to make things sound cohesive like that. Yeah, so frequency ducking, whether you're doing it with a like dynamic EQ that can respond to incoming signals or a compressor with a sidechain, both are fantastic techniques. You don't need to do them all the time though. And this is what I think a lot of time when people are thinking about mixing, they tend to overthink it. And they tend to put a lot of do an extra bunch of extra work that they don't need to do. So the way I like to think about mixing is all your frequencies are competing with each other, right? So anything at like 100 hertz is competing with all the other sounds that are also in 100 hertz. Anything at 250 hertz is also competing with other things at 250 hertz. So depending on what kind of music you're making and what kind of sounds you're using, there might be certain frequencies where there's a lot of stuff happening. So for example, if we were to just like take a look at, I don't know, look at this percussion. Where's my spectrum? Most of what you're hearing from these shakers is in this kind of like 5K to 10K range, right? Most kind of there. We get a little bit below here, but this is mostly where they live. Nothing else lives up there, right? So these shakers will cut through a mix because they're not competing with anything else, because there's a few things like some higher harmonics up here, but not much else lives up there. Whereas a lot of your mid-range sounds are going to live in the like 250 to like 2000 hertz range. And so there's a lot of competition right there. So depending on how many layers you have in your sound, you might want to be doing some kind of frequency ducking or side chaining. So that way the sounds that are more important will cut through that mix, because when their volume goes up, things in the same frequency range will go down. However, if you have a song that maybe like it doesn't have a lot in the mid-range, maybe you just have like a guitar and a vocalist in your mid-range, you don't need to worry about it so much because there's only two things, and so the competition is not that much. But for a lot of styles of electronic music, where you have, you know, like chord progression, and you have some bass lines, and you have your synths, and you have your vocals, and you have, you know, all the things layered together all at the same time, setting it up so that only the most important sounds will cause ducking on some of the other sounds. That I think is a pretty good technique to use. But if there's not as much competition, then don't worry about it too much. And a lot of times, instead of like setting up a dynamic EQ or something like that ducks, you can just do the same thing just with an EQ. Just like if one track you have a bunch in this area and you want it to stick through the mix a little bit, boost it a little bit in that area. And then on your other tracks that also have frequency ranges or frequencies in the same range, kind of do the opposite. Duck it a little bit in kind of that same range. So that'll de-emphasize, you know, this sound, which is one of the other sounds, and then emphasize the sound you want cutting through your mix. So when you're mixing and doing that kind of processing, think about like a competition, and there's a hierarchy in terms of which are the most important sounds and which are the less important sounds. What are the backup sounds? What are the supporting characters? And who's the main character? So for example, your vocals live, again, in that mid-range, the like 250 to 2000 hertz range. And there's a lot of competition there. So if you want your vocals to really stand out of the mix, yeah, you might want to boost those a little bit where the main vocal part is. And then other sounds like maybe your chords or your pads, you might want to duck them a little bit in that range to give there more room for your vocals to shine through. Hopefully that answers both of your questions. Unfortunately, I don't have like a mixing session right here to demonstrate on, but I appreciate you coming in and asking questions. And if anybody else is just joining us and would like to ask any questions, feel free to just toss those in the chat. So Q means resonance right here. This is basically on like old school analog gear. They abbreviated the word resonance to Q. I believe it stands for quality. I believe that's what it was from, but it's just like an old school, like a reference to like old school gears, but it's the same thing as, you know, resonance on any other filter. It's the same as that. They just wanted to be cool and use the word Q or letter Q instead of resonance. Cesar is asking, is it good to have volume compensation max for live devices on all channels, or is it better to keep them for audio buses? No worries, Ringa. Appreciate you coming by and asking questions. Hopefully I'll end up getting back to LA at some point. Yeah, no worries, Cesar. So, all right, is it better to have volume compensation max for live devices on all channels, or is it better to keep them for audio buses? So by volume compensation max for live devices, are you talking about like compressors, or are you talking about a specific max for a live device that adjusts the channel volume? I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. And if you guys are enjoying the stream, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed, or any of that stuff. What's up, After Party? How are you doing? Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out this question. Volume compensation max for live devices on all channels, or is it better to keep them for audio buses? Yeah, I suppose I would need to see which max for live device you're talking about. But it's my guess you could probably just keep them on your buses. Thank you, Ringo. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to toss them in the chat. Yeah, Cesar, I'm going to wait till you hear a little bit more about what you're talking about. There it is. So the idea is that if I'm going to use some of the internal audio processor effects, yeah, so links don't work in the chat, unfortunately. So I can't see if you put a link in the chat, it just doesn't show up. But if you just let me know what it's called, I will check it out. Is it like, let me see if I can pull this up. This guy, the volume compensator? Yeah, this might be by a different person, but maybe the same thing. So this is just giving you volume in terms of dBFS, and then gives you the output. Okay. Yeah, so for something like this, for just being able to kind of like figure out where you are in terms of dBFS and what it's being output to, I probably wouldn't put them on individual tracks at all. I would probably, or even buses, I would probably only put this on the master, because that's all that really matters. Because the volume inside of live can be whatever it's one. It's the volume that you're going to be sending out before you're exporting that is going to be the one that's going to give you the information that lets you know if you are in the right place or not. So when I'm producing, I'm generally not too worried about this. So for me personally, I would not put it on a bus or any individual channel. I would just put it on the master, and just when I am finishing my mix and my master is when I would actually use this, because I have something similar that's a third-party plugin that does kind of the exact same thing, and I don't look at it, don't need it until the song is basically done, and then just to make sure I'm on the right place. But I'll have to try the Max for Live version. I've been looking for a new one of these. Yeah, DBFS is such a pain to deal with. Like, you can have this mix that sounds like super ideal, and then you're like, okay, everything is way too loud, or everything's way too quiet in terms of DBFS. Or if you're like you spend all this time mastering, and then you're like, I like still not where I need it to be. It can be kind of a pain. Yeah, after party, deleting presets can actually be a fantastic thing, or creating like a separate special folder that's like, these are the best presets. That can take a huge amount of time. Awesome, Silvano. I'm glad this is inspiring. The push is basically how I write everything these days. Yeah, Ringo, we can talk a little bit. I've talked about it before on the channel, my template, but we can talk a little bit about it. I probably should use my template today. We can talk a little bit about what kind of things I use in my template. Let me go ahead and save this guy real quick. Oops. What did I do? There we go. Let's put this in the folder for this week. Yeah, reverse engineering presets is one of the best things you can do to become a better producer, a better sound designer. That's the best way to just learn all that stuff. All right, so this is currently the newest version of my template. There's still a few things I need to fix. I'm looking to actually finalize it a little bit this week before I resave the official version for the next couple months. But one of the things I was going to do was put this right here. All right, so in terms of plugins, there's not a lot that I'm using in my production template. You can't see them because it's behind my head. I do have 3 return tracks over here. One of them is Valhalla Shimmer, which is a third-party plugin that I absolutely love. And the other 2 are Valhalla Vintage Verb. One of them is specifically for my snare, and one of them is just like a generic reverb preset. So those are my 3 return tracks. I am most likely going to either remove one of these or add another one that's going to be the hybrid reverb and potentially echo on one. I'm not sure if I want to do that. I keep changing my mind in terms of like, what is the ideal number of return tracks to start with. Right now, I really like 3. I feel like 5 it just feels like it's too many. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what I'm gonna do there. But in terms of plugins, this is one of the only places where I actually have plugins is on my return tracks. And it's just that's not the snare preset. This is the snare preset. And it's not even the preset that I want. It's just called snare. I usually go in here and I'll tweak the settings here. Or sometimes I'll even try some of like the gated snare preset is actually pretty good. Or not this one, the regular gated snare preset can be really nice. So I don't have this actually loaded up with like the preset that I want, but sometimes I use the presets, sometimes I'll just make my own. But I mostly just have it separate so that I have one specific return track just for my snare. Other than that, in terms of plugins, I have Does it still have it on it now? I just have some generic kick drum loaded up in here on a drum rack. Keeps doing that. And then generic snare, just so I have something to start with. I usually swap these out anyway. I have an audio or a MIDI percussion track that's empty. I have an audio percussion track. And then pretty much all of my other tracks, it's mostly just an EQ8 and utility on there. The other thing that I've done is all my tracks start at -12 decibels. The sub has an operator on it with a saturator, because that's normally what I do for my sub, is just operator with saturator. Bass is empty, just as an EQ and a utility. The reason I don't use a lot of presets in here is if I start with things already loaded there, then I end up just using those. So part of the benefit of a template is to make it open-ended so that I can just change direction. So if I feel like using operators today, I can just toss an operator in here. If I feel like using, a third-party plugin, I use Serum or whatever, I can just toss it in there. So most of these tracks here, even though they're labeled as specific things, they don't have anything in them yet. Same thing with the synth tracks. The piano is just the grand piano, live preset. And then this one is just contact, just an empty contact. And then there's one MIDI effects and one audio effects track. And that's it. And then everything that's not the drums is in a group called Sidechain. I was using a third-party plugin called Gatekeeper, and I'm swapping it out for Duck Buddy for the time being. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it that way, but you can use whatever sidechain thing is the one you like. You can use that there. So they're all in the sidechain group. But other than that, like I said, I try to keep the template simple, straightforward. It just allows me to save myself some time as I start writing stuff. But not a whole lot of like plugins other than some of the basic stuff in there. But feel free to let me know if you have any questions about it. As I said, I'm still changing my mind about a few things, but this is what I'm going to be using for probably the next few months. It's good to update your template every, 3 or 4 months, just as your workflow kind of grows and changes. Yeah, Cesar, this is the same color layout I've been using for nearly a decade. So I can open up a project from 2012, and my drums are purple, my basses are blue, my synths are green, my sample instruments are yellow, and my effects are orange every single time, and they're always in that order. This is one of the big things about templates that's really nice, is you can open up things you haven't seen in a while and just get working at it, and everything's really clear. So this is the same color system I've been using forever. Color coding is super useful. So Silvano was asking, how do you control CPU buffering size? Keep in mind, I think 62 samples, since it lets me run Superior Drummer smooth, but the Ableton instruments all go crazy afterwards. So buffer size is a really interesting control that you have options to play around with. So the way buffer size works, in general, is that the smaller buffer size you have, the less latency you will get. So if you're recording from a microphone into your computer, and you notice you're playing on time, but everything's recording a little bit late, you want your buffer size to be smaller. However, smaller buffer size means it's going to take up more of your CPU. So at a certain point, if your buffer size is too low, then you'll notice weird clicks and pops and dropouts, and your CPU just going crazy. So the general rule of thumb is when you're recording audio, you want your buffer size as low as your computer can handle. When you are not recording audio, you can keep this more or less as high as you want, and it's not a big deal. It's not going to negatively affect your session or anything like that. So that's kind of how it works. So right now I keep mine really high, especially while I'm streaming, because streaming is already pretty intense on my computer's processor. So this this makes that a little bit less of an issue. Although I've been noticing some weird things with buffer size and CPU on the Mac M1 chip, which is what I'm on, and sometimes it doesn't behave the way I think it's going to. But hopefully that answers your question. So if you are noticing, things going weird in live, try a higher buffer size because that's going to be easier on your computer. You shouldn't need to run your buffer size down at like 64 or anything like that in order to run Superior Drummer. I don't think there's anything in that would like negatively be affected by having a larger buffer size, because it's just receiving MIDI as far as I know. That shouldn't be too much of a problem. Yeah, buffer size is weird because it's always the opposite of the way you think it's going to be. Small buffer size is faster but more intense. High buffer size is going to be easier on your computer but more latency. Yeah, after party in, when I'm doing production, I don't really care about having the groups here. But when I'm doing live performance, having a group right in the middle is kind of a pain. I don't want that there. So what I would do in that situation is make a new audio track, put it way over here. This would be my sidechain group or whatever you want to call it. And I'll make this a color that's nice. And then take all of these tracks, audio 2, the group that they're supposed to go to, and then just set this one to be monitor in, monitor in, and now everything goes to this group. And now when I'm looking at it, I don't need to look at that. I could do the same thing for my drum group too. Go over here. I found when I'm producing, it doesn't really affect me that much, but definitely when doing live performance, if I'm going to do any group-based things, I like to have my groups kind of at the very bottom or the very right, depending on how you're looking at it. So take these guys, send them to the drum group, and also set the monitor in here. And I think that can be a really nice way to do it, because a lot of times when you're working on stuff, especially if you have something like the push, you don't want to have to scroll through on the push through a bunch of like groups, and especially groups within groups. This is a way to like keep it kind of out of sight, out of mind, and then when you need it, you just go over here, and then boom, there's your groups for you to like play around with. It's functionally the same thing as putting it in a group. And this is especially important if I'm especially like dealing with say I have an 8-track live setup that looks something like this. This is perfect for live performance, because now if I'm using the buttons on the push, everything on the push, it's like I have access to all that stuff right here. And then these two are outside of the red square, so I can't like accidentally hit that or do something with that. But I have control over all of them. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to know you're enjoying the videos. It's been a little tough recently. I feel like some of the growth on the channel has slowed down a little bit, and I'm trying to still release quality content and stick with it. But sometimes it can be rough when you're like, oh man, I made this really dope video, and then it doesn't get as many plays as you think it should probably. Same thing is true with music. That's what it means to be a musician, to put your heart and soul into making something, and then being like, oh, I guess that nobody wanted to listen to that one. But yeah, this is oftentimes what my live performance setups will look like. I'm not exactly in terms of these tracks, but in terms of 8 stem tracks, and then groups over here as needed for processing. And that, for the most part, as I'm playing stuff on the push, don't need to look at, don't need to touch, but this is just help me keep things organized. Sweet. Anybody else? Well, first off, thanks to everybody for popping in and saying hi. Anybody else have any questions or things that they want to get into, things they want to chat about, let me know in the chat. We can also dive a little bit more into templates if you guys want, but templates are interesting because it's really about you, right? It's about like what are the decisions that you end up making a lot when you're producing? What are the things you like? What are the repetitious? What are the things you're repeating all the time, right? So for me, it's things like recoloring tracks. Like I don't have to do that as I'm working on something. I want them to already be the colors I want them to be, or renaming tracks, or putting them, organizing them in a specific order. So it helps to already have that stuff there because that saves me, not a whole lot of time individually, but all the time added up together makes a big difference. Awesome. Thank you, Cesar. What part of Costa Rica are you from? I have been there quite a few times in my life, and I really enjoy it. I'm hoping whenever they do the Envision Festival down there again, I'm hoping to, if I'm lucky, be able to perform there, but at least go to it. Yeah, after party. I had a good holiday. I drove down to New Mexico, hung out with some family. My wife and I decided that millennial Christmas is way better than the boomer Christmas because I don't know. I feel like our parents' generation, Christmas is so ritualized and it's so formal and it's like there's all this pressure on Christmas to like be a thing. Whereas when you're hanging out with people your age, it's just like we're just gonna hang out and watch a movie, and it ends up being a lot more chill. Nice. I've been down to the Osa Peninsula quite a few times. It's super beautiful down there. Well, that sounds dope. After party. Tim Shoebridge's about the history of analog transitioning into current digital hybrid world synthesis. Yeah, I think the history of synthesis is fascinating. So I definitely want to dive deeper into that. There's a few documentaries and things I've seen, a few books I've read about it, but there's always like cool things to learn about, especially that time from like 60s and 70s going to the 80s and how like that shift from analog to digital and how like now things are shifting back to analog or like trying to find that sweet spot in between the two. I think that stuff's really cool. But I'm gonna write that down just so I remember that. Yeah, Cesar, I agree with that for sure. Sometimes I had in an earlier version of this template, I had like a few different like basic drum patterns already built into it, so I could just load them up and hit play. So I have right now I only have the 4 on the floor, but there's a point where I had like 10 different beats in here that were like pretty common beats that I would use. But that stuff's super useful. I also one of my goals for this week is to update some of my drum racks and just make like 6 or 7 drum racks with like 8 sounds in each one. And that way, when I sit down to write a track, I just grab one, toss it, like drag it in, and then just go from there. I've been spending way too much time building drum racks from scratch recently, so I just need to sit down for like 2 hours and just make a bunch of new drum racks. Like go to Splice, get a bunch of drum samples, make like 8 drum racks, and then have them ready to go. And that's I think that's going to be my project for this week. All right, let me catch up with the chat real quick. Actually, are you talking about the debate between analog and digital? Because I have some opinions about it. But I do think that stuff's really interesting. Yeah, Mike, I feel like I've kind of, found my voice as an educator in this situation making YouTube stuff. Um, I do need to I have some ideas for different experiments I want to try. For me, the trickiest part is how do I make cool, interesting content without getting too clickbaity about it? Because I don't like any of that stuff. I want content that is in depth and interesting, and so I'm trying to figure out like where that middle ground is between clickbaity and uh, interesting in depth kind of content. Matt, I occasionally have actually fairly recently been using just the drum synth sounds in a rack. Usually what I'll do is I'll have like, if I have a rack that's got like kick, snare, hat, like 3 or 4 sounds, maybe 1 or 2 of them will be drum synth. I end up not using it for every single sound, just so I get a little bit of variety in there. But I think that drum synth is fantastic, and usually I don't use 100% drum synth, but I'll include them and kind of like pepper them in a lot of my drum racks for sure. Yeah, Silvano, I'm kind of in the same thing. Or I have all of these presets that I've made for years and years and years, but when I sit down, I'm like, oh, I just want to make something new. I just want to start from scratch. So I think part of my 1 song a week challenge that I'm starting next week is I need to make sure I have those presets ready because I'm not going to be able to make something from scratch every single time. So it's going to be a lot of presets, a lot of workflow, especially for the first couple weeks, is making lots of presets. All right, so After Party wants to know my opinion about analog synths versus digital synths. And I think just in general, if we're talking about especially like recording technology and analog recording technology versus digital recording technology, I honestly don't think there's much difference in terms of what you get out of it. Like there's no magic thing in an analog mixing board versus, recording something in directly into live. It's all waveforms. It's all kind of the same. And I went to a talk at an Ableton convention called Loop a couple years ago with a dude named Scientist who's like a OG dub guy, like was there at the birth of dub music. And he started as an electrical engineer. So he would like create a lot of he would like actually like make a lot of the mixers that all of these early dub artists were using. And he was really funny because he was like, it's the same thing. I've made both of them. I've made digital mixing boards and I've made analog mixing boards, and they are functionally the same thing. There might be a tiny difference, but like there's no magic in there. It is what it is. However, when it comes to synthesis, I think things are a little bit different. I think in one of the things that made a lot of like early synthesizers sound so good is the fact that they're not perfect, right? The tuning might be a couple cents off, or the filter might not be exactly where it's supposed to be, or the filter might add a little bit of distortion because a lot of these early synths, a lot of like early Moogs and things like that, were like put together by hand. There was somebody sitting there soldering them, and so differences in the quality of the soldering might affect the way it sounds. Whereas a digital oscillator is more or less perfect, right? If we were to like look at something like wavetable here, which track to put on, and like take a look at an oscilloscope, and this waveform here is basically like a perfect square wave, right? There's like no imperfection there. There we go. And if you look at it, you see there's like little spikes at the top and the bottom of the square wave. That's actually how it's supposed to be. So you get these perfect waveforms that in analog synthesizer, like that's a perfect sine wave. An analog sine wave might not be that perfect, or an analog square saw wave might not be that perfect. So in digital synthesis, everything is like exactly the way it's supposed to be, which, as we know from like writing drum beats, if all your drum beat is quantized perfectly, then it sounds a little stiff. It loses a little bit of the life, right? And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of like analog synthesizers, especially good analog synthesizers, is that there are little bits of imperfections in there that can really just make it sound a little bit more natural. It sounds a little more organic, which is weird because it's all synthesized waveforms. But digital synthesizers are designed to just be perfect. You can make them imperfect. We can like detune this by 2 cents and like, I don't know, add like a little bit of unison or something to make it a little bit off or whatever. And you can purposely do that, but it doesn't, that's not the way it comes. As opposed to like just grabbing an old, 70-year-old, 60-year-old synthesizer and just like screwing around with it and seeing what happens. So I think it's subtle either way. Most people listening to a synthesizer are not going to be like, oh man, this sounds really analog or this sounds really digital. Most people, even people who are really into synthesizers, cannot tell the difference. So that's kind of how I feel about the difference between the two. I think that like an analog synthesizer, you do get imperfections and you do get these little weird like eccentricities almost. Whereas with the digital synthesizer, every time you load a wavetable, it's gonna sound exactly like that, with those settings. And like with like an analog synthesizer, you have to like warm up to like get all the circuitry going. Like some of my analog oscillators on my modular, if you turn on, wait a few minutes before you can tune it because it like has to heat up before it actually will play the thing it's supposed to. So that's one of the cool things about analog. The other thing I really like about analog synthesizers is there's something really tactile about being able to touch the thing that you're using to create the sounds. And I know you can kind of do that with MIDI controllers on a digital synthesizer, but it's not quite the same thing. So I do think there's something fun in that way. So I think in terms of like audio quality and what you get out of it, there's really not that much difference between analog and digital synthesizers. There's a subtle difference, but it's real subtle. But I do think there's something more tactile about playing a physical object as opposed to playing a software synthesizer that I really appreciate and I think is actually really cool and I think does help me be creative in different ways, which is really, I think, the whole point of a lot of music technology is to facilitate creativity, right? To make it so that you are inspired to sit down and make something. And that's why, always being in the box, making stuff digitally can like wear down on your creativity a little bit, just because it's like, all right, staring at a screen for all day for work and emails and all this stuff. Whereas being able to like touch something, I think is actually really helpful and nice. That's why I bought my modular synthesizer really, was to have something I could touch and not look at a screen all the time and still make weird sounds. Yeah, I think the reissuing of old synthesizers is also a little weird to me. I think it's cool. I think it's nice because if you were like really into, acid house and you're like, oh man, I want a TB303, but I can't afford the like $4,000 for an original TB303 or whatever they're charging. So you can get like the replica 303. It's kind of cool. I think that I like the accessibility. I like people having access to tools they wouldn't have access to. But I think I would rather have something new and interesting and exciting, like a new take on, you know, there's lots of cool new takes on like even wavetable synthesizers. There's a really cool wavetable module that I want to get for my module modular synthesizer. And like different takes on like physical modeling and kind of like there's new things that are coming out that are worth looking into. And I'm not necessarily as interested in being like, oh, I can get like an MS-20 replica. It's like people have been making sounds with that forever. I want something kind of new. Yeah, man. I mean, there's so many synths out there now. I'm ready to do the next stage of my modular synthesizer and swap out some modules. I feel like I've kind of know what's going on with mine. So yeah, that's kind of like a long rant about how I feel about digital synthesizers versus analog synthesizers. They're all fun. They're all like cool to play around with. But yeah, if anybody else has any questions or things that they want to talk about, feel free to toss those in the chat. I'm probably gonna stick around for another like 15 minutes or so. But I appreciate all you guys stopping by. Feel free to hit the like button if you are enjoying the video, or subscribe. You can also check out the Patreon. The 50 song challenge that I'm doing is starting next week, and there's a bunch of benefits related to that on the Patreon, and it helps support the channel and helps me do these streams all the time. Mike, the only new plugins that I've tried recently, I've talked about on the channel a little bit, which are the noise engineering plugins. These guys are fantastic, and I will continually talk about them until they start giving me free stuff. But yeah, noise engineering stuff, it's free, it's great, definitely worth looking into. Other than that, I haven't been looking into plugins a whole lot. I'm one of those people who suffers from terminal gear lust. And so if I start looking at plugins, then I like have to buy them. And I don't have a lot of self-control in that regard. So I'm trying to save myself some money and not buy as many plugins. The other ones that I guess they're not really new for me, but Future Audio Workstation. This is a really fantastic plugin called Sublab, and it's pretty cheap. Oh, I haven't activated on this computer. All right, well, I'm not gonna put in my code here on stream, but Sublab is fantastic for just big, boomy, bassy sounds. It kind of does one thing, but it does that one thing really well. And that's really kind of what I look for in synthesizers is like, I don't need a synth that can do every single thing. I want something that can like do one thing. That's kind of like the same way I feel about restaurants. I love restaurants where they're like, we make one sandwich and that's the only sandwich we make, but it's really good. That's kind of how I feel about plugins. Yeah, Matt, the Electron stuff is dope, but it is deep. It like I had one for a little bit, and I just like there's so many menus within menus, and you have to spend a lot of time with the manual, I feel like, to really dive into the Electron stuff. So I ended up selling mine, and I kind of regret it a little bit because I'd like to have it around. But I have a soft space in my heart for Electron. I just haven't like committed to like getting really deep into it. Yeah, Sublab is pretty specific, Mike. I feel like it's one of those ones where I don't always use it, but when I do use it, I'm like, oh yeah, I really like this thing. Any other plugins I've been using recently? Not a whole lot. I mean, I've always been using the FabFilter stuff. I love the native instrument stuff. I haven't installed all the native instrument stuff on this computer yet. But those native instruments are always ones I go back to, and I'm like, these are just so good, and they always have a tool that does the thing I need it to do. So I haven't tried a lot of the newer native instrument stuff, but the classic native instruments are always good ones. Interesting. You want a drum synth that has a UI where you can drag and drop samples in it and directly to the device. So you could layer samples with the synthesis engine. Is that kind of what you mean? So it's kind of like a drum synthesizer / sampler. And then you gotta like have the same envelopes and all that kind of stuff on them. That'd be cool. I think if there's anything like that off the top of my head. I mean, you could like just layer a sampler with a drum synth with a sampler. That would be kind of like the cheesy way to do it. We just kind of like simpler here, but it wouldn't have the same like settings. I feel like I've done something like that. Let me think about it after party and get back to you, because I feel like there's a device or a plugin that can do more or less exactly that. Yeah, it's going to drive me nuts until I think of it, but I'm pretty sure I've done that specifically. Are you looking for a hardware drum synth that can do that? Because that would be a more complicated question. So Cesar was asking, after the volume compensation master rely device is about gain staging. So to formulate the question, what are good levels for maybe a synth, bass, and drums? That's a fantastic question, Caesar. A lot of it comes down to where you are in the workflow. So you'll notice that this is still left over from my template. All of my tracks start at -12 decibels. And then when I make a new audio track, it also starts at -12 decibels. And when I make a new MIDI track, it also starts at -12. So I personally, when I'm producing, like to have everything around -12. Just as place to be. This is not dBFS. This is just regular decibels here. We're not talking about using the max rely device. This is just in general, as I'm working, I like to have about 12 decibels of headroom. And then as I go through the process of mixing, my volume coming out my master is going to go from -12 as I'm producing. I'm not actually going to change this here, but like the actual volume coming through here would be -12. As I go through the process of mixing, it's going to go up to around -6. And then as I am mastering it, it's going to go from -6 up to 0. That process of me going from -6 to 0 in mastering is the only time when I'm actually looking at a dBFS meter. Other than that, like I said, when I'm producing, I don't really care. When I'm mixing, I don't really care about dBFS. It's not really relevant yet. It's when I get to the end, as I'm mastering, is when that's going to be more relevant, as I'm going through the process of going from that like -6 to 0. And then I'm going to slap that dBFS meter on there and see what it can do. But yeah, I like to start at -12. I know people who like to start at -18. It's up to you. I just don't recommend people I see a lot of people start their songs where everything is at 0 decibels, including me earlier today. That's usually not a good idea, just because if you want something to be louder, you can't go any louder if your sound is already at 0 dB. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense as you kind of go through the process of, producing into mixing and mastering. I like to have about 12 decibels of headroom. Yeah, the Air Assistant stuff seems really cool. I made a resolution to not do drums with hardware because to me drums are way easier on software. But every once in a while, I'm tempted to do some modular synthesized drums. And the Erica stuff looks really nice. So Alejandro, what's up? How you doing? Welcome to the stream. This is a really great question. So is there ways to tap tempo BPM in a live situation and get the whole number? Ooh, the tap tempo is interesting. If I tap tempo here, as far as I know, with the tap tempo, there's no way to not get decimal points in there, but I will look into that. However, with the, if you're MIDI mapping something, if you wanted to like MIDI map your tempo here, if you map this can be really annoying. You'll notice that like as I change this now, we get crazy decimal points here. You can change that if you go to your MIDI mapping and you set your range to be 127. So if we start at like 20 and go to like 147, now as I MIDI map this, nope, maybe sometimes 127, sometimes it's 128, depending on the MIDI controller. Let's try that instead. There we go. So now if I MIDI map this, we can see we're doing, in this case, 0.5 decimal points. Most MIDI controllers will just do whole numbers here. So there is a way to get rid of decimal points if you MIDI map it. As far as the tap tempo goes, I don't think there's a way to get rid of the decimal point because it's supposed to be exactly the way you tap it. So it's kind of designed specifically for that more kind of human feel. But I will look into it and see if there's any way to get rid of the decimal points. But I do know you can get rid of decimal points when you're MIDI mapping. Yeah, Cesar, having the EQ is nice just because at some point I always end up using it. So it's always there. I also, the regular one, I think looks like this or this, something like that. So I changed mine so that it has a low cut and a high cut up here and here. But other than that, it's just the basic EQ8. Yeah, it's a great question, Alejandra. Like, I'm pretty sure it's designed specifically to not to have the decimal points. There's no way to change that. There's no basic preference that changes that. But it may be possible. Who knows? What's up, Jason? In the past, I have made racks and made them downloadable. I think I've done a couple for this channel, and then when I've done stuff for other channels and things in the past, if I do like a sound design tutorial, I'll make a rack of the sound design and then make it downloadable. I think long term, I would like to have a set of like, here's a template that you can just go to my website and download for free, and here's like my, 8 bass plugin or 8 bass sound design things that I've used recently, and that's partially why I'm doing the song a week challenge, is so that it forces me to make a bunch of content, including make a bunch of racks. So I think over the next couple weeks, as I'm doing the song a week, anytime I make something cool, I'm putting in a rack, and then I think maybe every month or so I'll update it, and make it downloadable. But yeah, that's something that's been on my radar, but I haven't got really around to yet. I also feel a little bit like, especially with some of the sound design stuff, I actually think it's really valuable for people to make it on their own. And so when sometimes people are like, oh, I can just download the thing, and then they never learn the skill set of how to like make that sound or make that patch. So yeah, I'm still going to be doing it, but I also encourage people to make their own stuff. After party, I was actually a friend of mine does some like printing, so I was actually going to make a Catalyze hoodie, but I was just going to make one of them. And so maybe if we get to like 5,000 subs or something like that, I'll make like merch and release it. But as of right now, I think we're still not quite big enough yet. Yeah, so Alejandro, you're running into the issue of you have guitar players, really for him to adjust the delays, but I always have to tell him a whole number near the one I get, and it's not accurate. Yeah, let me think about that, because I feel like there's a solution out there that'll allow you to do something like that, Alejandro. But unfortunately, I do have to end the stream a little bit early today, but I appreciate all you guys coming by and saying hi. I got to go get my COVID booster shot to make sure I don't get sick. But you guys take care of yourselves. Have a good evening, afternoon, night, whatever time it is, wherever you guys are. I will be back tomorrow for a Patreon stream. So if you're a Patreon member, you know where to go. If you're not a Patreon member, you should highly consider it. It definitely really helps the channel still exist and continue to exist and hopefully grow in the future. If not, I will be back on Wednesday for a song feedback stream. And then New Year, we're getting into it. We're going hard next year and just making lots and lots of music. And we're going to make a bunch of presets and templates and release all that stuff. So I'll see you guys later, and have a good night.